This is the Anything Goes with Jax and Neill podcast. Welcome back to the podcast here for episode number 117. Today, a first for Anything Goes, the first ever gospel singer on the podcast, and it's none other than Takiyah Hall, who just released her debut single, Redeemer. But before we jump into that, just want to remind everyone to rate and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, SoundCloud. You can find this podcast on all of those, so make sure to rate and subscribe so you get the new episodes every single Tuesday and Thursday. So as I mentioned, Takiyah's first single is Redeemer. It's an awesome one. I highly recommend you guys go check it out. And it's off of her upcoming album, Crowned, her debut album. So in this interview, I talked with her about making that single, about this upcoming album. She worked with some really cool people on it, including two-time Grammy nominee Corey Stute. So she tells that story, what it was like working in a studio where she looked around and saw all of these music idols of hers on the walls with their different plaques, and how that was a little intimidating, but she was able to overcome that and record her own music to her best of her abilities. So it's a really cool story. She's really fun to talk to. So let's jump right into it. So just, can you tell me a little bit about your single, Redeemer?
Redeemer. It is about my testimony, the testimony of my life, growing up, being human like everybody else, and making mistakes in life, and just having God come in and correct those mistakes, or help me to correct those mistakes with his power, of course, and his grace and mercy. That, totally turned my life around, and I've transitioned and blossomed into this woman of God who has a story of making mistakes and being able to be, accepted by God's love, and being able to share that experience is what Redeemer is all about.
Okay, then why did you want to make this one your first single off your upcoming debut project?
Because I've had a lot of bumps in the road. I mean, a lot of them. I've dealt with a lot of unforeseen circumstances, a lot of situations where I thought things were going to work one way, but it happened another way. And so my producer and my husband were like, I wanted to release a song called Poem first. And my husband and my producer were like, no, we're going to do Redeemer. I'm like, no, they wanted the fast song. I wanted the slow song, Growing up, I was a R&B. I loved R&B, so I was like the slow song kid, Mm-hmm. But they decided to release Redeemer, and, it really reminds me of my life, my story, the foundation of my relationship with God. It's just him redeeming me from the old and bringing me into the new, which kind of transitions into the title of the entire album, which is Crowned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a cool concept to have on that kind of first single you released from your debut project. It gives audiences and gives people a way to really know a lot about you as an artist just from that kind of first offering.
Yes. Yes, and to be able to share the fact that, look, I work for God, Jesus, I love him, and you know what, at the same time, I'm not perfect, you know what I'm saying? And so he never asked us to be perfect, he just asked us to come to him. And when we come to him, he does all the transformation while we trust him to do it, and he begins to open those doors as he sees fit and as we grow in him. So, yeah, it's a lovely relationship that I've had with God for over 20 years now. And it's, like I said, the album just repeats that, it embodies that experience.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump into that album, Crowned. Why that name of the project?
That name of the project, to be honest with you, I was a kid that grew up without a father. I did eventually have a stepdad who loved me very much. But my father was not in my life. And because of that, I was broken, you know, and I had a sense of low self-worth. I didn't see myself as beautiful. I didn't really love myself. I thought I did. But as I got older, I realized that I really didn't. You know what I mean? There were a lot of things that I allowed in my life as a broken person, one who doesn't really understand what love is, you know what I mean, but wants to be loved. And once I was able to see, you know, the truth about myself and be able to look in the mirror and say, you know what, let's try this thing over again. You know, you can love yourself. You can transition to be a better person and accept better for yourself. So that's what this album is all about. It's coming from the old, going into the new, coming from the brokenness and being whole, you know, coming from an empty place and being filled. You know what I mean? And being able to tell the story and be honest, upfront, and truthful about it all at the same time.
Exactly. Wow, that's pretty awesome. What you mentioned, kind of like a transition there, and really learning to really love yourself and really appreciate yourself. I guess what helped you go through that transition?
You know, you'd be surprised if I would tell you that the very thing that I thought would kill me were the things that helped me to transition into it and mature from the brokenness into being whole. You know what I mean? It's so interesting. You know, the very thing that I thought I couldn't handle, that I thought that I could never deal with, were the things that kept happening in my life over and over again until I got over it. You know what I mean? And doesn't that sound like how a parent would teach a kid? You know, if you're afraid of deep water, you know, some parents may encourage you to stay in that deep water until you get over it. You know what I mean? And not pacify the fear, but guide you to a place where you could have faith and believe that, you know what, I'm in deep water, but I can swim. You know, it took me a while to understand that I'm afraid, but I could work through that fear. Now I can swim in deep water. You know what I mean? So I think that's what God did with me. You know, he allowed me to experience those things that I thought I never could, that I never thought that I would live through. And I was able to go through it, not easily, but I had his strength to depend on. You know what I mean? And now I'm better, I'm stronger, I'm wiser. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing how sometimes, you know, how in life you have to go through those tests. You have to kind of figure out these are the things that I struggle with and overcome them. And once you are able to do that, it's like they don't stand in your way anymore.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I talk about that in the song, actually. In Redeemer, I mentioned a scripture that says that we are overcomers through the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. You know what I mean? And the blood of the Lamb is representing Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made on the cross to die for my sins, for our sins. And so I keep mentioning that in the song over and over again, you know, and I'd like to also add that, you know, just recently I talked to a friend of mine who I hadn't heard from in 10 years. You know, we had this big fallout, you know, and when you're young, you know, you fall out about anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, so she ended up getting the song. I didn't know she had the song. I tried to reach out to her before because I heard that, you know, her sister had passed away, and I hate to, you know, mention that, but I mean, that's life. So, you know, I showed up to the funeral, even though I hadn't talked to her in years. And after that, she found out that I released the single, and she called me up one day. And I'm like, I didn't know what to say. And I was like, well, how could I thank God for this call, you know? Mm-hmm. And she goes, you know, I got in my car, and she said, every day this week, your song has been playing nonstop. She said, I try to change the channel, and it won't change. And she said, it's been like that every day, and it's been playing over and over and over again. And she said, one day I just said, okay, God, I'll call her, you know? So she called me, and we were able to reconcile, you know, I mean, it's just, and I know that that is the power of God, because to be in unforgiveness and to have resentment towards someone, that's bondage. That's not freedom. That's not being redeemed. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I even see that, how the song is continuing to help me. It was my trial and my struggles through Christ that helped me to write the song, but the song is still working on my behalf. So I would love to encourage any and everybody out there, Jackson, that, if you're feeling down, if you've been in a hard, rough place, if you feel like you just can't get over it, can't get through it, there is a redeeming Savior that can pull you out of anything. I don't care what it is. You can have freedom, and you can be redeemed through the blood of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really cool story too. I mean, that's crazy how that happened.
Yes, it is. It is, and it's something so small, but the significance of it is it's the small foxes that destroy the branch. Mm-hmm. It's the small things that could eat you alive. You know what I mean? One small thing after the other. And if you could imagine living life, let's say you're 70, okay? Just, pretend. Let's just pretend like, okay, I'm 70. I'll be 70.
I don't mind being 70.
You don't mind? Okay. Okay. So let's say, we're older and we've had a bunch of small experiences that took a chunk out of our lives. A little bit of negativity here, a little bit of negativity there. After you add all of that up over so many years, that small thing, it joins together as one big glob of mess. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so when we're able to cipher through all of that and clear it out, we become much joyful, much more happier in life, and we have more peace. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I'm experiencing every day. And I'm going to be honest and say that life isn't perfect, but it is a lot better. It's a lot better for me, and I thank God for that.
Exactly. It's not about it being perfect, but just making it the best possible life it can be.
That's right. That's right.
So I want to touch a little bit on the music side of this, because I noticed you worked with some really big names, including some Grammy nominees on this. Just
yes.
What was it like to have one of the names, Corey Stute, who produced and arranged the lyrics? What was it like working with someone like that, these Grammy-nominated artists?
Do you really want to know? I have to tell you this short story, okay?
Okay.
So as a young girl, I told my mom, I want to sing. She says, okay. And she worked very diligently and very hard to get me on major platforms in my city. So I was singing at Neill Outdoor Theater, which is a very huge theater, and different shows that come on, the Houston Ballet, really big shows come and perform there. The Museum of Fine Arts, back in the day we had the Teen Summit, and that was popular for a minute. So I was on a lot of those platforms and on local television stations. And throughout that time, I did not know that my mother had made a connection with Corey Stute, So over the years, from my youth, being a very young girl, my mother would, approach Corey and say, I want you to work with my daughter, All the while, I'm performing here and there. I know nothing about it. And I ended up meeting Corey in my young adulthood in 2003. And he asked me, he said, do you want to work together? I wanted to work with him, Jackson, but I just, I told you, I was broken. Mm-hmm. So I just couldn't see I had a dream to sing. I always had that dream, but I guess I didn't feel like I deserved it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I couldn't see myself. So I just didn't accept it, so he went away, and then I met him again in 2012, and he asked me again, and I turned him down. I'm like, no, this is not for me, you know what I mean? And then again, I met him again in 2017, and I finally said yes. I finally said yes. And so one thing turned into another. And it was working with him was very easy in terms of him accepting me, not belittling me, helping me to feel welcomed and telling me you're loved and this is where you belong. You know what I mean? But all the while, I just had the tears were just flowing down my face because I couldn't believe that I was sitting across from someone who had worked with Beyonce, you know, someone who was the music manager for LL Cool J for like 8 years. You know what I mean? And even right now, he he plays for Gloria Gaynor, the big I Will Survive platinum disco song, you know.
Yeah.
And now she's released a gospel album and he's been touring with her. You know, it's very humbling, but at the same time, it helps me to understand exactly where I need to be. You know, and I had to accept that in my heart first before I could actually see it materialize.
And that's so cool when you mentioned how you saw him a couple times before you really sat down and recorded with him. It kind of reminds me of what we were talking about earlier with those tests that you kind of get throughout your life of like, will you eventually pass it? Will you eventually overcome and decide, yes, I do want to start my singing career. I do want to work with this other very talented musician. So it sounds like you finally passed that test, I guess.
Yes, exactly. 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 And there are many more tests within that, you know. So now it's the challenge of, okay, you know, when they call you and it's time to perform, you know, you can do it. Get out there, you know, stand up strong, you know, tell them, you know, who saved your life. Tell them, you know, how you've been redeemed and how you're a new person from your past and how God can do the same thing for them, you know. So I have to be brave in that as well. So I think every step of the way there'll be a test to pass. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
But I believe that, yeah.
You'll always have new tests. You'll always have new challenges to face, and it's just about overcoming them.
Exactly.
So I saw that this track Redeemer was described in some writing I saw as combining gospel, jazz, and Latin music. And then I also saw that you have a singing style that's been compared with jazz, gospel, and pop. So you like to combine some genres is what I'm kind of getting at. So what kind of music has inspired you throughout your life where you want to kind of fuse genres together?
Okay, so you asked, so I'm going to tell you. So when I was a young girl, I loved gospel music, you know, because I grew up in church, you know, and my grandmother would take me to church every week. It felt like we lived there, Jackson. Mm-hmm. And so I've heard of a lot of gospel greats, you know, and like Shirley Caesar, you know, who I don't know if you've heard, but she was trending on social media for the greens, cornbread. You know that song?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Shirley Caesar. Oh, she's been singing gospel forever. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I mean, she's the type of gospel singer when she sings, she makes the hairs go up on the back of your neck. Mm-hmm. So you know it's the power of God speaking. But those were the artists that I listened to, or the ministers that I listened to as a young child. But at the same time, I had a huge love for R&B. So Diana Ross and Lionel Richie, they just grabbed my heart with this song called Endless Love. Oh my God, that was like my favorite song. I think I was in second grade around that time, and I knew every lyric of that song, you know. So throughout the years, my mother has always been a radio personality ever since my elementary school years. And she would, you know, play all kinds of music, reggae, African music. I'd hear her play Latin. You know, you get a little Tracy Chapman, Sade, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All mixed up in there, you know. And so with that, being exposed to those different types of genres and, you know, being around art, you know, taking African dance and going to choir rehearsal and acting class under a wonderful mentor, Wayne D. Hart, who was in the movie with Ice Cube. What was the name of the movie? Long Shot, I think it was. Yeah, Long Shot. Ice Cube and Keke Palmer. So I was exposed to so much. So I took that, and when I started writing my songs, I didn't even know that it was in me, but it came out. It came out.
And just something you just kind of figured out and is like, oh, this is how I express myself, is combining all these things I grew up listening to.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. So,
exactly.
It's so cool. It's kind of like a natural thing.
It is. And it feels natural because, I hear the music in my head first, and Corey, he kind of raves about it a little bit because, during my listening party, he told everybody there that, one thing about me is that everything that they created, it was around what I had been given originally, what I heard in my mind. Mm-hmm. So what I had, he didn't try to make it fit what he does. He accommodated me. They accommodated me as the main artist. And they were like, listen, however your song is supposed to be, however it's supposed to sound, we want to accommodate that. We don't want to change that. So I'm so happy that they kept the integrity of the original sound of the music and how it came in my head first. And I actually had to communicate it to them, the beats, the sound, the tempo, the feel of the song. So it was a wonderful experience. It really was. And I look forward to eventually working with some of the artists that Corey has been working with as a writer, as a singer, whatever I can do in the industry. I want to do it. I'm ready to get my hands dirty, I'm ready to get to work, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And it sounds like an awesome experience too, to work with those kind of musicians on your debut project like that, and to be able to kind of have those people helping you figure out your artistic vision.
Yes. And when I went to the studio, and shout out to Jab's Productions, when I went to the studio and it was my very first time, I looked on the wall and oh my God, I saw Usher.
Oh wow.
There was a plaque. I think it was a platinum song of Usher. Then I looked over from that and there was a plaque for Bow Wow. Then I looked over from that, there was a plaque for Tony Braxton, and I looked over from that and I'm just like, where in the world am I? What is this? And it's just to be able to I'm looking at myself, Jackson, in the mirror like, okay, you're not that broken girl that you were, and God is still building you up. But I never, in my wildest dream, would think that God would build me up to be in an atmosphere with these people who have worked in the presence of these artists. Mm-hmm. It was just amazing, but at the same time, so humbling. And at times, I couldn't hold back my tears. I really could not.
Well, yeah, that sounds overwhelming and incredible to, be stepping in to create some of your first music, and you're seeing those giant names, you're seeing those big names who were in that same place as you.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm just like, this is crazy. And my husband is like, well, get used to it because that's where you're going, And I'm like, well, okay, And so now it's just a constant me building myself up in God to know that, you know what, you can do this. You are worth it too. There's a scripture in the Bible that says that God is no respecter of persons, meaning that, he's not going to look at maybe the CEO of a company, and then look at the employee and then treat the CEO better than the employee. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So the way that he treats us is the same. You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter if you're a peasant on the street, or the most powerful man on the earth. God is going to treat you the same, And so I recognize that just in being in that particular place, being exposed to the knowledge of the fact that Tony Braxton, was here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just really something. It's really something.
Yeah, that's awesome. So do you have a release date in mind for this debut project? Is it a release date or a release time frame?
I do have a release date. It'll be spring of 2020. And the date that I am aiming for is April 18th. That is my birthday.
Oh.
So I will be doing a album release around that time, on that day, hopefully. And we'll see where it goes from there.
That sounds awesome. Overall, I guess, just how are you feeling now that you know you did your debut project and the world still, you're going to be able to show it off to the world in just a matter of several months?
I feel great. At the same time, I feel very humbled. At the same time, I'm a little worried. You know what I mean? And I think it's the fear of the unknown. But I'm even having to overcome that as well and just know that if God brought me this far, he's not going to leave me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So he's going to be there with me every step of the way. And I don't have to worry about being shamed or someone mocking me because, oh, your album is not your single isn't number one on the chart. We don't hear your name ringing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Well, that's not my focus. My focus is to be genuine to the message that God has given me. And eventually, when that time is for me and I'm ready and God is ready, I'll be where I need to be. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But I want to make sure that I keep my focus where it should be, and that is to encourage people and uplift people and let them know that God and Jesus Christ is rooting for them and that he wants them to be a part of their kingdom, of his kingdom. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think you definitely got it started off on the right note with Redeemer. That's a really just inspirational and just really cool song. So I think you're definitely on the right track.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And again, just a big, big thank you to Takiyah for coming onto the podcast. Had such a fun time talking with her. Remember, go down into the show notes on whatever platform you are listening or watching on. There, you'll find a link to check out Redeemer, her awesome inspirational single. I highly recommend you guys go listen to it, as well as another link to go follow her online so you know exactly when Crowned comes out and all of the other stuff she's doing. Speaking of other stuff she's doing, I have some of her upcoming events down there in the show description as well, so take a look at that. And that will wrap it up for this episode of Anything Goes with Jackson Neill. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to rate and subscribe this podcast on your favorite platform so you can get every single new episode Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the rating just kind of helps grow the show. So a thank you in advance for that. For more episodes of this podcast, as well as my sports and music discussion podcasts, go down to the link in the show notes to jacksonneillpodcast.com. That's where I publish every single episode of all my podcasts and have a full archive at. Also, if you're a really big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber on Patreon. For there, you get access to really cool bonus content for a couple bucks or even $1 a month. Like today, I talked to Takiyah about some of her favorite movies she's seen recently, some of the favorite music she's been listening to recently. So if you want access to cool stuff like that, head down to Patreon, link down in the description. And remember, I do this podcast myself, everything, writing, recording, producing, everything by myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support really goes a long way in allowing me to do this and spend more time making these cool episodes. Now, if you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeil20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.